You're listening to Informed Dissent. If you're a longtime listener, welcome back. If you're new, welcome, and here's the lay of the land. I'm Jamie Reed, a lesbian and a whistleblower who worked inside a pediatric gender center. My co-hosts are Lauren Leggieri, also a lesbian and a longtime LGB advocate. Our other co-host is Cori Cohn, a gay man who underwent gender transition early in his life. All three of us come from the left, and none of us fit the story you've been told about who questions gender medicine. And that's not an accident. Every week, we will cover the headlines you need to know across medicine, law, sports, schools, and prisons. And then we dig in. The three of us, and most weeks, a guest worth hearing from. We built this show because we believe that the most important conversations about gender politics are the ones happening between people with real stakes and real disagreements. Free inquiry, honest argument, and dissent that's worth something because it's actually informed. Welcome. Greetings and welcome to Informed Dissent for this week, Saturday, July the 11th, 2026. We had this episode ready to go last week, but we bumped it in order to cover the Supreme Court ruling instead. We still think this is a critical and really engaging episode, so here it is. We are closing out Pride Month a week late. Today, Cori Cohn and Lauren Leggieri are sitting down with Jack of Shadows. Jack writes under a pen name. We will call him Peter on the show. He is a canceled public health professional, gay man, not queer, and we've published several of his pieces on the Substack, including to date our most popular post, titled How a Private Conversation About Gender Got Me Fired from My Dream Job. The piece we're talking about today is called Odd Girls Out, Trans-Identified Women in Gay Male Spaces. This is his account of what's actually happening inside of gay men's spaces as trans and queer politics collide with them, from someone who's been living it. This is not going to be a talking point conversation. It's a real one from inside the LGB about things most people are not really talking about out loud. If you have a story like this, something that's happening from inside the community that isn't being said, we want to hear it. You can head to our contact page at lgbcourage.org and send it our way. And if you've got a guest suggestion too, someone you think should be talking with us, send that our way as well. And then, if you know them, put in a good word. Honestly, some people are a little bit scared of us. Let them know that it's safe to talk. And now, this week, on to the show.
All right, welcome back to Informed Dissent. This is our interview portion with Peter, aka Jack of Shadows, who did a really great in-depth first-person piece about trans-identifying women in gay men spaces. So we wanted to have Peter on and just have a talk about the piece and just his experience in the gay community and what he's seeing going on in terms of trans and gender and stuff like that. So Peter, welcome. Thank you for your contributions to our Substack, and thank you for joining us here on Informed Dissent.
Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see you both again.
Yeah. Could you tell us just for not everybody who's listening will have had the opportunity yet to read your series. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I wrote a three-part piece about my experiences with females who are trans-identified entering into spaces that were in the past gay men only. By gay men, I mean same-sex attracted males.
Yeah. So you're talking about like theaters.
For folks who might be new to this, since even before Stonewall, gays and lesbians, sometimes together, sometimes separately, had developed vibrant counterculture or subculture where they could meet, socialize, organize, build healthy identities. And these were a lot of times sex segregated. You'd have a lesbian space, and you have a gay male space. And if you look back into the history, there was collaboration. There were conferences and things like that where gays and lesbians and bisexuals were there as well. But you also saw, a divergence of spaces that were for women and spaces that were for men. And so these come in a variety of forms, from sex spaces to just social spaces or bowling leagues or anything like that. The event that I was talking about was sort of a weekend get together and hangout that was traditionally for gay men, that included a variety of activities, and which has now begun to be attended by females that identify as trans, some as men, some as something similar to men, and sometimes who don't identify as men at all, but feel that this is a space where they belong.
This I don't know if this is still a current thing. I'm sure it is, but there used to be like gay cruises where an entire cruise ship would be booked out, and it was for the crew and gay men, and that's it.
There are still a vibrant gay cruise culture, and cruise here is not a euphemism. It's a boat full of gays.
Right. And so some of the spaces you're talking about, we can imagine would be the on land versions of that, where there's
Yeah, yep. Yeah, it could be a campsite. It could
yeah.
be a private home. It could be a bowling league. It could be anything that's completely private to semi-public to fully public bars, that sort of thing. So
But ladies started showing up.
ladies did start showing up, and there's always been some tension. With male only spaces generally, some of which was justified when we were discriminating against women in public accommodations, some of which I feel like was maybe overreach, on the part of society. But particularly gay male only spaces, since the beginning, there were women who wanted to enter these spaces. If you look at Bruce Bauer's book Beyond Queer, his chapter actually discusses the forced inclusion of women, and this was before the trans thing, into the gay men's bars and such. So it's not a new thing. There's a certain, like I said, sometimes justified, sometimes not justified. I guess I'll say skepticism of male only spaces.
Yeah.
So you always had women trying to get into the gay bars, and previously we could say no, and now we can't.
It's from what I've seen, it was very often like bachelorette parties wanted to go to the gay bars.
The bachelorette parties are, in my experience, kind of a new phenomenon. Yes, yep, the bachelorette parties. I think that they're sort of a menace. You know, generally, I feel like, to any space that they enter. But yeah, you saw sort of in the sort of, I guess, maybe mid 2000s, you saw
Yeah.
bachelorette parties wanting to go to gay bars because they're like, we feel safe here, and there's all these hot men, and like the drinks are really strong, right? And the gay men were like, a group of screaming bachelorettes was not what they were looking for at their local gay bar.
But some of these other spaces, a bar is recognized as a public space, even though it's uh, might want to serve a particular clientele. It's still public. But some of the spaces where women started moving into, these are private spaces. These would have been
Yeah.
assumed uh, invite only or friend of a friend. This wasn't everybody was welcome. It was sort of part of a network.
Yeah, this is part of a larger network, and one of the something I'll mention. Yeah, bars are technically public spaces, but the technically, yeah, but traditionally there's sort of the letter, what is legal, and then there are norms, and the
Right, right.
norm was like you right. So like people, we
Yeah.
used to have norms, remember, but we don't have norms anymore in
But
in so many ways,
so also, Peter, like I feel like there's a big difference, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because
Yeah.
I mean, but there's a big difference between a woman who goes into a gay male's bar, obviously as a woman, not pretending to be a man, and kind of who knows her place as a woman in a gay, like knows that she's kind of an interloper, but maybe she's there with her gay best friend. That doesn't seem quite as offensive to me, I guess, as having women purporting to be gay men in
Yeah,
situations where they're not really being upfront with their biology at all.
yeah, it's not, and there were bars where women were welcome, right? Like not all gay bars weren't
Yeah,
like excluding even straight women. There were bars that you could take your friends in,
yeah,
and no, it wasn't a big deal at all. But there are other bars that were men's only spaces, and these folks are coming in and saying, hello kids, I'm one of you, right? Or hi guys,
yeah,
and they're 5'2", and you
yeah.
know and wear very tiny shoes. So yeah, no, that's a really important distinction to make. Some of these other spaces are, for example, something I don't hear discussed enough within sort of the gender critical, for lack of a better word, is the 501(c)(7) structure, the private club. Are you guys familiar with this at all? Uh,
Not, no, not any of the legal
uh,
stuff. Just
Well, caveat, I'm neither a lawyer or a doctor, but here's my legal advice. No, just kidding. 501(c)(7)s are private clubs, and federally, like currently, my understanding is that you can discriminate based off of sex. I mean, that varies by state, but these were meant to cover fraternities and sororities, for example, but
Yeah.
501(c)(7)s are used for all kinds of different things, like condo associations or like even grocery stores or things like that. The main point is that you have to have a membership, right? So you purchase a membership, and then you are allowed to enter that space. And in those spaces, they are allowed to discriminate based on sex, unlike a coffee shop, right, where they have to let everybody in, or the women's bookstore in Portlandia. You can go in as a man legally, but like one does not simply enter a feminist bookstore as a man, much like one doesn't simply enter Mordor.
mm,
Rightfully so. You know. So as far as the space in the piece, this was a private residence, and it was sort of an invite only space. So, but this event has been going on for a long time. And these women have caught wind of it and kind of networked themselves into it, but they're an odd fit for it, in many regards, and as I detail in the piece.
Yeah. So what kind of motivated you to take this on? Because I mean, I kind of I thought you were very direct, but still very compassionate about, these women who you feel are kind of invading your spaces. So what kind of got you to the point where you were like, I need to write about this? Because I think for people in this space, we don't always talk about the gay male spaces being involved. There's a lot more discussion about women's spaces in sports, and I think that reason is obvious, right? There's a clear safety concern. But I think what's important about talking about the women going into men's spaces is that it's not just a safety concern. There is kind of an underlying, like, everyone deserves a certain amount of dignity. So I just want you to talk about why you feel so passionate about this and why it's just as important that we talk about preserving single-sex spaces for men and gay men as we do as with the same amount of fervor that we talk about with women, and what differences you think there may be there.
So as I've started to write about this, I do a lot of listening and reading about the gender issue, and the more I write about gay men's spaces, the more I've started to see the issues that the men are facing. There's some overlap, right? But it's really kind of categorically different than the concerns that the women have. I think the identity concerns are very similar insofar as like lesbian means something, right?
Hmm.
And if you take away people's ability to say no, then they can no longer construct an identity that's coherent, right? I think that's similar, but the spaces themselves, how they're used, the concerns are, I just think, categorically different. Almost, you almost can't compare them. So, saying that, as far as what motivated me directly was, number one, concern because I was seeing women who were a lot of times visibly unwell coming
Hmm.
into these spaces. Um, and that triggers sort of an empathy and a compassion response from me as somebody who's worked in public health. But on the flip side, there's this kind of paradox where I'm also like, you don't belong here, and I'm offended that you're here. But on the other hand, I'm also worried about you. So, and those things sort of like exist together.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to write about it, because I don't think that there's been enough writing about the women both who are coming into the spaces, who I think a lot of times are endangering themselves, um, and or the men's response to it. The emphasis has been on the sports stuff, female safety, female privacy, which I think is, I think is rightfully so. I think the needs over there are urgent. But there is a real impact and there is real harm of these trans identified females, both to them and to the men coming into these spaces.
Could you say more how they're endangering themselves? What does that look like?
They're not men. So the same, but they're entering spaces where there is male norms, male social norms,
Mhm.
male sexual consent norms. And they have a completely female and often very online understanding of what men are and what gay men's culture is like. And so when they come into these spaces, particularly the women who have, like I said, not a doctor, but there seems to be, I mean, I feel like this is uncontroversial to say, but there's a lot of overlap between autism and other mental health comorbidities. And this to me seems pretty visible. They're coming into a space where there may be nudity and or sexuality, and they're wholly unprepared for this because they're expecting in many instances to still be treated like women, but they want to be one of the men. And gay men don't treat each other like that. It's not sort of a gentlemanly culture, to sort of put it mildly. And so when these women get quote unquote treated like men, that endangers them. Furthermore, these spaces have begun to attract straight and bisexual men who are specifically looking for, and if you go on Grindr, you can see this right now, specifically looking for trans identified females because they see them as easy marks for an easy lay. And
Wow.
I feel like many of these girls don't understand that. I've worked with autistic people, and sort of executive functioning and social cues are not necessarily their strong suit. They can be quite literal minded. And so if a guy is telling you, no, I really think of you as a man, I really want you as my boyfriend, when really he's just going to ghost you, I think
Wow.
that's a
So how,
problem.
so you're actually seeing this in the spaces you're attending,
Hmm.
that these are heterosexual slash bisexual, whatever, but you
Yep.
would consider them probably predatory men looking for easy marks. Are these girls generally like younger than,
Yes. Yep.
yeah.
These are usually the under 25s. I mean, this is. I mean, Corey, maybe you can attest to this a little bit more. But if you look into the F to M Reddits, a
Yeah.
common theme you see there is like, I thought he loved me. He said he affirmed me, but he's talking about my lady parts or whatnot. I don't want to be too blunt here, but
Yeah.
using coarser language than that.
There's something that I have a pretty good imagination, but one of the things that I really don't understand, and I don't think we should try to unpack too much, is straight men who get with women who take testosterone.
Mm.
Like, what's the story? What's the deal? Because yeah, you do see these stories where there are women who are in these relationships and they're constantly uh, destabilized because the men see them as women. It's like the lowest. Uh, I don't mean this in an unkind way, but for men who are just trying to get with somebody, going after these women who have such low self-esteem and are so easy to
Hmm.
um, not, I don't even know, coerce,
Manipulate,
manipulate. That's
Yeah.
manipulate.
the right. That's
Yeah,
the right word. That's the
Yeah.
right word.
and
They
and
they
and
seem to.
they know exactly what they need to say. Like they've figured it out. They've dialed it in. Sometimes they're predatory, or sometimes they're just not particularly discriminating. I think for some men, it's a little bit of a fetish. I mean, I don't want to ascribe too deeply, a motivation here, but I was just on one of the apps and I saw a trans-identified female claiming to be postpartum, and she's looking for gangbangs.
Wow.
When I was working in public health, I had a colleague who would regularly hit me up, and she was a trans-identified female, and she would drink and drug, and she was meeting up with guys and then regretting it later, and this was a cycle for her.
What kind of guys are these? Bisexual men, gay men?
uh I mean, what I'm observing is that these are bisexual men. Whether or not they describe themselves as bisexuals is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And let me
What's their
just let me just
identity?
I,
They identify as gay men?
they a lot of times, they're gay men, or they're saying they're gay men. But I don't want to get into the identity piece,
Yeah.
because this is so. And here's why. So there's all of this pussyfooting around about people's identity that is completely divorced from their behavior.
Yeah.
So there's all of these, like in the gay men's community, there's all these straight men who seem to like having sex with men a lot. And my understanding of a straight man is that they're not having sex with men.
Yeah.
Or perhaps they experimented once or twice but did not continue, and these men continue to have sex with other men, right? So like identity claims, I feel like at this point are frequently not made a good faith. So I describe them as bisexual
Yeah.
because they're having sex with
And they're
trans-identified
clearly
females and
motivated to
men.
have sex with women.
Clear. Yeah.
What is so this to me would, you would think that gay men would be very worried about this, like, especially having come out of the stigma of like being predatory, and now you actually have predators coming into your spaces deliberately to seek out younger women. Like, are gay men, are they seeing it and ignoring it? Or are they unaware? Are they wrapped up in the ideology where they're like, oh, I guess they're just two gay guys? Like, what are they? What are you getting any feedback from the other gay men at these events saying like, guys, like this is does not look good for us. This is not good for us.
Definitely not. This is not good for us. It's more a general from the actual gay man, like repulsion. I mean, I like
Okay.
I said, I don't want to be unkind here, but like
No, no. Yeah.
we're into what we're into, and when we're not into it, it's not what we want, right? And so I hear like, what is, why is this person here? This is always a private conversation, right? Like they never say
Yeah.
anything openly. I think that there's two competing things going on here. One is that the ideology is a mile wide and paper thin, and once you see through it, you can't unsee it. But if you haven't unseen through it, it completely blinds you to everything, right? So the forced teaming, the kind of Trojan horse of gender ideology, doesn't allow men to actually see what is going on here. And that's a broader issue within our society in general. I remember going to conferences where they were talking about what I think of as really unhealthy behaviors like prostitution or drug use, which used to be talked about in a harm reduction standpoint, meaning we're not judging you, but we're also not encouraging you. We'd like you to behave in a way that was healthier for you, but we're going to wait for you to want to come to that. And we're going to provide you some services to, you need to celebrate these things. And I just don't think that like blowing cops for crack is something that is celebratory. This isn't like I get tired of my office job and I decided for strip for a couple of years in college, right? Like this is a whole other level of really, really horrible stuff. The other thing is I think that there is a small segment of men who are bisexual enough and and are like, hey, why not? There might be drinking and drugs going on, and so they're just kind of like, I don't care. I'll do this, or I don't mind this. Why, I get a lot of like, why do you care? Like we should, people should be able to do what they want. Adults should be able to do whatever they want. And I'm like, well, no, not
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever,
They
not
don't like
whatever.
the gatekeeping.
No. What did you say?
They don't like the gatekeeping.
Correct. That is a very good way to conceptualize it. And I
Yeah.
think that gays and lesbians are sensitive to this because we have been gay kept. So we don't and I think for a lot of gays and lesbians it feels like if we're saying no to the opposite sex who whether they have a good faith identity or not, that we are gatekeeping and we're
Yeah.
sensitive to that because we've been excluded for oftentimes being non-conforming in some way or just because of who we're attracted to.
There's a description that used to be in more of the common parlance, but has kind of fallen away, called a libertine, which is somebody who uh,
Hmm.
has no sexual morality at all. They just want to they're looking for opportunities, and it doesn't matter how they fulfill them.
That is a good way to characterize, a small segment of these men is they're looking for whatever, or they're willing to tolerate whatever, even if they're not personally interested in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, Peter, I thought you it really is kind of a complex topic because I don't know if people realize, but these are not just quote unquote heterosexual females that are coming into gay male spaces and
Well,
saying that they're gay.
that's the other
These
piece
are some
that I'm
lesbians that are
confused.
claiming to be gay men.
Yeah, yep, yeah. The younger woman, I'm not sure. She certainly seemed interested in the men and what the
Hmm.
men were doing, but it also may have been just sort of like this was new and being like,
Yeah.
wow, she's getting a front row seat to something interesting, But
Yeah.
yeah, I think there seems to be like the first women seem to be experimenting, right? Like trying on different kinds of things and saying, does this fit? How does this feel? Right? Because like being just a butch lesbian just didn't seem to fit, even though when I looked at her, I was just like, you're just a butch lesbian. Like, I always thought butches were the coolest.
We
Like
are.
I don't know how did that become uncool, you know? But apparently to her, it was, seemingly not enough. With the other woman, she seemed clearly like grounded in her orientation. The language she used was confusing her, but she knew what it was that she wanted in the kind of sex based that she wanted to create. What was it's a lesbian sex party. That's
Right.
what it is, you know. But the ideology prevented her from saying that because going back to Cori's thing, she was seen as gatekeeping, right? But
Yeah.
also, like I indicate in the piece, she's going to get it from both ends. She's going to get it from potentially men who identify as women who could be disruptive or violent, because they're being excluded, and also from trans-identified females or other trans activists generally who are gonna be like, you're gatekeeping and that's transphobic.
Right. I mean, but the irony of someone who wants to have an all-female space instead going to an all-male space
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
just mind-blowing. Like the ideology
I
really
don't
just flips everything into like these illogical, like it's so, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
something something that I'm going to explore in further pieces. There was a segment that ended up getting cut because mostly for length, but also for focus reasons, is a concept that I'm calling right now homo misandry, which is a kind of a distorting or a dislike of specifically gay men, both because they're men and because they're gay. And one of the ways that this manifests is, and I write about that a little bit in this piece, is that a lot of the LGBT ideology and the trans ideology sees gay men as kind of demi-men, like this is a kind of manhood that is flexible or plastic enough for them to identify into, because there's an effeminacy, sometimes there's a decorativeness, an interest in beauty and art and so-called feminine interests, but also there's drag, right? So I'll meet a lot of younger women and they're just dressed like women and they'll tell you, I'm a feminine gay man. They think they're what's his name from Queer Eye, Jonathan Van Ness, right? I'm just like, you are not Jonathan Van Ness. You're just a quirky young lady, and there's other things that have begun to appear within the culture, like the rise of what I'll call female man for man romantic fiction. You see this in most recently Heated Rivalry.
Yeah,
But it predates that, and it's gone from being this niche thing on the internet where it was relatively harmless. It was just ladies writing about dudes getting it on. Like, I don't have a problem with that, but it's
Flash.
become mainstream slash fiction, but it's broader than that. There's a Japanese version, there's a mainstream version. So there's an audience for women who want to get a little weird.
So
And I think that's great. But
explain this a little bit. The female version of so this is you're saying the heterosexual woman's fantasy ideal of what it would be
yes,
like to be in a gay male relationship. Whew.
correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And they write these things and these get put forward into the culture as if they are representations of gay men. Let me give you a counterexample that's better known. I think, Lauren, you'll probably know this. I don't know if Corey will. The Wachowski brothers Bound,
Yeah. Okay. Hmm. Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
Jeannie Gershon with lip liner as a butch. She's got
I
a
gotcha.
tank top and a right. Like, this is
This is a
purely
straight
a
man's
male.
version of
This is
lesbians. Yeah.
absolutely, and I,
Yeah.
I love Bound, actually. I think it's a great film noir, but it is not. It is not lesbian, right? But it comes out. I listened to this film podcast that I absolutely love, and the straight woman was talking about Bound, and she's like, this film is so complex because it represented a kind of queer womanhood that like we didn't really know. And I was like, honey, this has nothing to do with queer womanhood or womanhood at all. This is a straight man's film noir lesbian
Yeah.
fantasy, right? And this is also happening now because the streaming services have figured out that women are more likely to pay for their services and men are more likely to pirate, among other reasons. They're pushing all of these shows out and saying, actually, this is LGBT, when in fact it's not. The woman who wrote Heated Rivalry is a straight woman, but she spends a lot of time obfuscating her sexual orientation. It's really strange. But I think that this is a form of this homo misandry that I'm talking about, where they're like we can just represent gay men in any way that we want to because we're women and we have a right to do this because it's men and they're gay men, right? Because
But I mean, it's the same with
women
the
couldn't be objectifying men. They couldn't be objectifying these gay men. That's not something women do. That's a man thing. It's absolutely not. Women just prefer this kind of stuff, generally speaking, in a literary form, I think. What were you going to say, Lauren?
yeah, I mean, it's very similar to, I mean, it is similar to these men who claim to be lesbians and their idea, because their whole idea of women is
Yeah,
like is still a straight man's idea of what it is to be a woman and even what it is to be a lesbian. I mean, it's the same
right.
goddamn thing. It's just it's so
These
crazy.
are being a gay man or a lesbian is an embodied experience. It's about who
Right.
you are attracted to. It's very much grounded in one's
Right.
sex, you
I do
know,
see what you're
and
saying though. Like these
yeah,
gender ideologues, they see me as less of a woman or a subset of women or even a subset of man, and you as a
hmm
subset. Yeah, I get what. Yeah, like
right.
our they don't even
It's
realize the homophobia in it, and the yeah,
it's total stereotypes, right? They're gonna
yeah,
say because you're a butch, or or because I was a sissy as a boy, that I'm not quite a man, and so they'll be
yeah,
like, oh, I can sort of slip in here, right? Because these
hmm
are like,
yeah,
I really think that it's sort of it's this unspoken third gender nonsense that they're not using that word, but they're basically just saying gays and lesbians kind of, because they're sometimes non-conforming, we can slip in over there because there's going to be less questioning, because these women, if you're 5'2", and you wear a size
Yeah.
4 shoe, like no straight men are going to accept you. You're just going to get laughed out of that space. But the gay men, because of the conditioning and because of the like all of this gender studies nonsense, they can sort of slip in there and go unquestioned. But also the lack of sexual interest is there as
yeah.
well. So
It,
nobody's pestering them.
it's funny though. Me and Corey were talking about the Pride event that I was at a couple weeks ago, and it was a very powerful visual for me to be behind. It was a group of maybe three, maybe it was four trans identified women, and some a couple of them past ish. I mean, they had like the beard and like whatever, but I was behind them and we were passing by the obviously gay man party, like not like
Yeah.
it was the obvious, like the bears were out there, the gay, and they were massive
Yeah.
like in
hmm
retrospect it was like watching, I think Corey made the joke, it was like watching mini pinchers behind a pack of Dobermans, and that's
hmm
exactly what it was like. And I'm like, what are they thinking? Because you literally you can see them like looking up at these men that are just towering over them. And I'm like, what are you thinking? How are you justifying that? How are you making that make sense in your head?
and so much of when you go into a gay men's space, whether it's a bar or a sex space or a pride march, is about sort of like navigating this space as a man. Even if you're a smaller man, a shorter man, you've got shoulders, you've got feet, you've got hands, you've got muscles, right? And so it's like easy. but I see these women and they look like lost buoys being batted about by the currents. The men are all, coming in and out, and it's my heart goes out to them because I'm just like, you don't fit here,
Yeah.
and there's always this clear imposter syndrome, and I'm just like, what are you doing here? You should go make a space where there's other people like you who want to be with you and who have a similar embodied experience, who can really, that's such a rich experience as a gay
Yeah.
man, and lesbians have a similar experience when you're just with your kind of tribe, right? And it's just the men or it's just the women. That's an embodied experience that it's a little hard to sort of describe that, but like there's a consciousness change, there's an ease, and there's a physicality to it
But that's
that,
specifically what this stuff is not. It's not meant to be an embodied
right,
experience. It's meant to be
right.
you know, a
Well,
thought experiment, honestly.
I think that there's an undercurrent here, which is that anybody who's gone through any medicalization, regardless of their sex, probably shouldn't be in these spaces.
Maybe. I read about this a
Well,
little in the piece as well.
yeah,
It's a lot easier to integrate gay men who have decided to transition. You see this, it's always been kind of around. It was on the decline since the 80s and then has kicked back up again. But
yeah.
you would occasionally see gay men who would trans, and we all knew them as gay men. And so they come back in, they're still physically men. They're tall and broad, and maybe the cosmetic look has changed, but
Mm,
also they're known, and there's a cultural fluency there, and a sort of unspoken sex fluency there. Not sex as in the act, but sex as in like differences between men and women in their
mhm.
body language and expression. So I don't know. I think it depends on the space. Certainly if it's a space involving sex itself, that becomes a whole other question because
Mm.
nobody's interested. The gay men are no longer generally interested in gay men who have trans. But in social spaces, I think that's a little different. I don't know. What do you think, Corey? What's your experience been?
Well, keeping in mind that I started transition pretty young, particularly relative to the era that I transitioned in, uh, I I don't find that there's very much welcoming or acceptance or openness of myself in those spaces. And in more recent years, I've tried to be more uh, putting myself out there a little bit more and trying to find opportunities in social spaces that are meant to be welcoming of gay men. And it's just not a good vibe.
Can you say a little bit more about why it's not a good vibe?
Yeah, I think that there's two elements to it, maybe three or four if I start to unpack it. Uh, the one that I want to talk about least is probably the one I should start with, which is that I think that there's a perception that anybody who's undergone medicalization is damaged goods.
Hmm.
And that's like a warning sign. Um, it's hard to look underneath the surface of someone that you already just assume is damaged or broken in some way.
Hmm.
Um, the uh, Similar to that is that I think just the more visceral point, which is a feminized man has added layers on top of their core masculinity with things that are not attractive to gay men. Um,
Hmm.
having a anyway, enough said on that. But I think the
Uh,
other point, which I'm more comfortable talking with about, is I think that there's a fear of expressing anything that's skeptical or non-affirming. So the people who are afraid of
Hmm.
gatekeeping
Hmm.
are extremely uncomfortable having somebody who has abandoned a trans identity in their spaces,
Mm.
because it's a source of it's destabilizing. It
Yeah.
Hmm.
it makes it impossible for them to uh, reconcile that they're so trans affirming and so great, and then also hear somebody who, by their own testimony, was hurt by the process. And I don't think that they want to be around people who make them think difficult thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like,
I think that's true of the
yeah,
lesbian community too. Like
yeah.
there's
It's
trans men are
challenging.
pretty easily integrated into the lesbian community, but de-trans lesbians are not welcome. They're not.
Really, I think this is a point of difference, Lauren. I was going to come to you next, and ask you about this because in my experience, was that a lot of times the butch lesbians would trans and retain their partner, or at least remain within the women's community and were sort of known,
I
and
think
that
yeah.
was much more accepted both sexually and socially than the gay men who would transition. The gay men who would transition would have to find romantic and sexual partners, usually outside of the gay men's community, whereas the trans-identified females who medicalized wouldn't necessarily. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of trans-identified females in the lesbian, quote unquote, lesbian community. I think that the difference is now transition has become so easily accessible and
Mm,
so prevalent that like it's not just lesbians transitioning, and then you have the added confusion of what testosterone does to female sexuality. So then a lot of the women who are actually lesbians become attracted to men. I mean, it's a whole mess now, but I do think that it's easier to integrate. Um, I just think women are just more open in terms in those terms. But detransitioned lesbians. Um, if you actually talk about being harmed and call yourself detrans, you're not welcome because of exactly what Cori
really?
said. Yeah, so like it's not even an appearance thing, right? It's an ideological thing. Like people don't want to hear about like because you how could you distinguish between a female that has fully transitioned and then detransitioned and someone who hasn't you can't, right? There's no going back. So it's an ideological thing that people don't want to be confronted with, I think. But I mean, the whole thing is just is also there's so much not talked about on the lesbian side of like the women who are involved with transitioned women, like the lesbians, like what they lose in terms of um it's often a sexually functional partner and then their own identity as lesbians if they're assumed to be straight all the time. But that's a whole other topic because we get into that a lot. But I don't think people hear as much about what's going on in gay male spaces. Um,
Speaking of testosterone, I'm curious, is there any clinical data on the effects of testosterone, transition levels of testosterone on both female sexuality? I know that there's clinical data on that, but and sort of this sort of pseudo bisexuality that seems to appear because
I
I've
think
known
it's all been
numerous.
anecdotal, but I have heard it many, many times from
I,
detransitioned women that like it was a
yeah,
weird kind of pseudo sexuality.
to the topic at hand, I've known numerous gay men who have had either experimented with or had relationships, or bisexual men who had sex with trans-identified females and men. And a lot of the trans-identified females say this is just a sex thing. Like I'm like sometimes they'll even tell you I'm really a lesbian. I don't want to be with men, but like I'll do this because I have some urges right now, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
it blew my mind. It just seemed unimaginable. And I'm just like, what does that do to you if you have sort of this like compartmentalized intimacy, right? Like if like on one hand your body is like, give me stimulation, but on the other hand it's coming from somebody who you're not oriented to.
Yeah, I mean, the way it was described to me is very destabilizing. Like, because this was,
Hmm.
and the one person I can think of in particular was a very young woman, and she was very disturbed by it. And once she was off testosterone and really started think she was like, it was really terrifying the situations I was going to put myself in. And like,
And
yeah,
if you're
it's almost like came with like a lot of shame.
if you're coming into a gay men's space where the gay men all know what's going on, and there's a lot of very frisky sexuality going on, and you're getting pulled in, it's that I imagine that would have to be really, really scary. And I'm concerned about these women because one of the things that you see in sort of sex positive spaces is sex positive spaces, whether they're kink scenes or whether they're just like a group sex situation, if they involve women, there is a heavy emphasis on consent norms, and the women are usually the ones driving this consent norm. You see this in clubs that mix men and women. When the women get involved, there's a lot of consent norms. I think that is great. I fully support that. This is important for women's dignity and their safety to have a strong consent structure. Gay men don't have those same very formal, very strong consent structures. Like if you go to a certain kind of space, you're going to get groped, you're going to get touched, like and you just learn early on that you just set a boundary, and it's I would say, 9 out of 10 times not a problem. You push a hand away, you say no thanks, and it's not a problem. Sometimes you get drunk people or creeps or whatever, like it's sort of the price of admission. But and so if you're bringing women who believe that they're gay men into those spaces, a lot of times they've been educated by their universities or by the community itself
Or
that
by being
they'll
socialized as a woman.
that's right, they're
Yeah.
expecting female consent norms, and they just simply don't exist, and so they're getting groped and touched, and there's other people doing that to each other. And I think that there's that can be really destabilizing. And I've seen when women come into the gay men's spaces, they can be really, really disruptive because even them seeing gay men doing this, and the gay men are happy about it, and they get really, really mad about this. And it causes a kind of tension because the gay men can't say no, because you don't want to be a jerk and be like these women and their consent norms, right? But on the other hand, we don't want or need those same consent norms.
Could I? I'm curious, and I apologize. I have to wrap up in a few minutes here, but you guys can both keep going. But at this point, I know that there's not always a physical sign that somebody has detransitioned because they might not have medicalized very much. But are you starting to see men who've detransitioned appear in any of these spaces?
I haven't. I have maybe run into two, and that was it. But no,
Were
nope.
they were they just identity and they desisted, or have you seen like medical detransitioners,
I've seen
medicalized?
medical detransitioners, and
Yeah,
I spoke to one of them at length. It was over a digital platform, and he I felt like he had some additional work he needed to do. He was relatively like nonplussed by the transition and sort of the detransition, despite him saying he had almost no sensation in his testicles anymore.
yeah,
And so like, right, but I mean, when we're talking about um medical transition, right, we're always talking about this disconnect in the body. And I want to pause here, is that part of my interest in this is that I was a sissy as a boy, and I absolutely would have transed if I had grown up today. I'm almost certain of that because as a child, I told many adults like I'm a girl, I want to be a girl, and at
Yeah.
that time they just laughed at me.
Mm.
They'd go out and play, which was exactly the right response. But I continue to have a certain degree of gender confusion, mainly because of my university education, but for other reasons as well. I would say
You're a precocious
until
child. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Keep
yeah,
going.
up well into adulthood. It was only until the sort of not the transsexuality of all, but this current gender ideology. As soon as I peaked, as the kids like to say,
Yeah.
suddenly this led me on a journey of being like, wow, I was kind of dysphoric for a long time, and I had to look inside and be like, why was I that way, and sort of unpack those things. So people, there's a lot of ire towards quote unquote cis gay men, but what cis gay men aren't talking about is I think this is a very common experience among gay men, particularly cisy childhoods, and a certain degree of like, am I a man or not? I am a man, but am I the right kind of man? Right? There's a lot of I'm not enough, I don't measure up. And gender ideology comes right in and says, we've got some ideas for you. Right. And so when I'm talking about this stuff, I too come from a place of somebody who has struggled with my sex and my self concept. So when I see these girls coming into my spaces, that's why my heart goes out to them, because like I understand to an extent you're confused, you're being misled by an ideology, and not only that, you're being misled by what we're calling the chain of trust when it comes to medical transition. And that's a really hard, very disorienting place to be.
Peter, thank you so much. I'm gonna tell our listeners if they want to read your three-part series, Odd Girls Out. It is on our LGB Courage Coalition Substack, and it is well worth the read or the listen because I've just found out that you can listen to all of our Substacks. There's an audio button.
I hope
Um,
it's read by Judy Dench.
that would be perfect, wouldn't it? Um, but seriously, guys, you should check it out. Peter, thank you so much. Please keep writing, and we'd love to have you back. I think we just need to have more gay male voices out there talking about this stuff.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to come back. Thank you so much for having me and for giving me an opportunity to write about this important issue.
Thanks so much. All right. Bye bye, guys.
This podcast is produced by the LGB Courage Coalition, a registered United States nonprofit fully funded by small donations like yours. We work to promote evidence-based medicine, ending the medicalization of gender nonconformity, and advocating for LGB rights. Supporting this show means supporting that work directly. If what you heard today mattered to you, please like, subscribe, and pass it along. Word of mouth is how independent shows like this one survive. You can reach us in the Substack comments section or by email at lgbcoalition@gmail.com or through the contact page on our website at lgbcourage.org. We want to hear from you. And until next week, stay informed and ready to dissent.